I wore white, not because I believed in love, but because I wanted him to see what it would cost him to touch me. Why would a woman marry a man just to hurt him? Why smile in the wedding photo if your heart is plotting revenge? And what happens when the plan to break him breaks her instead? You'll want to hear every word. If stories like this stir something in you, like and subscribe, because the most unforgettable stories always begin with a secret. The wedding was beautiful. For everyone else. The Whitlock estate stood like a cathedral of ice on the hill, half lost in falling snow. Its chimneys whispered smoke into the sky. Every window flickered gold against the deepening gray. It looked like a dream from the outside. That was the point. Inside, everything was too quiet. The ceremony took place in the music hall, though there was no music. Just the rustle of silk and the clink of antique silver. Roman stood next to me, silent, solemn. He wore a three-piece suit, the color of storm clouds. He didn't look at me, not once. Not when the minister spoke. Not when I said, "I do." Not even when he slipped the ring onto my finger with the precision of a man fastening a watch. He signed the paper with a silver pen. So did I. No kiss, no speech, no pretending. We were husband and wife, on paper, in public, for power. The applause was polite, short, as if no one wanted to admit they were there. Roman offered me nothing but a brief glance as he turned away. I didn't need more. I wasn't here for affection. I didn't smile. Not once. I walked beside him. Not behind, not holding his arm. Just beside, like a figure carved into the same marble block. My steps echoed his, but my thoughts didn't. He married me because he needed a wife. I married him because I needed access to this house, to his secrets, to the past he buried beneath stone and legal fire. He thought he'd acquired a quiet, clever woman with no baggage. He didn't recognize the daughter of the man he destroyed. Dinner was worse. We sat at opposite ends of a dining table built for 20. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. The fireplace crackled behind us. A servant placed plates neither of us touched. "You're quiet," Roman said eventually, cutting his steak with surgical calm. I assumed that was preferable. He looked up. His eyes were gray, like slate after rain. "You assumed, right?" I held his gaze longer than I should have. It didn't flinch. Neither did mine. After the meal, Roman disappeared into his study. The staff showed me to the bridal suite. It was breathtaking, in a cold way. Deep velvet curtains, ivory furniture, firewood stacked in a hearth that hadn't seen flame in years. And at the center, an enormous cedarwood bed. Dark, heavy, carved with vines and thorns like something dragged from a forest that didn't want to be found. The room smelled like time, like things that had been buried and not quite died. I didn't change out of my gown. I didn't undo my hair. I walked slowly toward the bed, holding the bouquet I never threw. Then I reached into the lining of my sleeve and pulled out the photo. It was creased and faded. My father, in his courtroom suit. The last time he looked proud. Before the lawsuit. Before the scandal. Before Roman Whitlock's empire silenced his name. No one here knew who I really was. Elise Danvers. Daughter of the man who once stood for truth in a courtroom and lost everything for it. Roman had watched my father's fall from the other side of the table. He'd signed the deals. He'd crushed the reputation. He hadn't blinked. He wouldn't. Remember the little girl sitting in the back row of the hearing room? He didn't know she'd grow up. Study law. Change her name. Get hired as a junior legal advisor in his company. Smile at the right moments. Ask the right questions. Appear in the right place. He didn't know that girl would become his wife. I hid the photo behind the painting, above the mantel. One small act of rebellion. a seed. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, still dressed like a bride, and let the quiet settle over me. No footsteps in the hall. No approach. Roman would not come here tonight. That had always been part of the arrangement. 1 year of marriage. No intimacy. No interference. He'd get his image. I'd get my access. We were both lying. Outside, the snow kept falling, thick now. The windows shimmered with it. I let the veil slip from my hair and fall to the floor. My shoulders ached. The corset cut into my ribs. Still, I didn't move. I stared at the carved headboard, touched the worn pattern with my fingers. Cedar wood. It held a scent that lived longer than memory. It reminded me of the courtroom benches, of my father's coat, of the coffin that held his silence when the truth never came. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried since the verdict. Not when my mother left. Not when the last client walked out of my father's firm. Not when he folded his practice and folded himself. I came here with no tears left. Only resolve. I lay down slowly on the bed, shoes still on. The gown rustled like paper. The chandelier above me glimmered in gold silence. And in that silence I whispered, "Dad." I made it. The room said nothing. The air stayed still. But deep inside me, something began to crack. Not with sorrow, not yet, but with the weight of everything I had carried too long. A house of justice burned once. Tonight, I was inside the fire. I was 11 the day my father lost his name. We stood outside the courthouse, the wind tugging at his overcoat, the headlines already spilling ink across the city. Danvers indicted for malpractice. Whitlock legal breaks rival. I remember gripping his hand so tight, my nails left half moons in his palm. He didn't flinch. He never did. Not when the accusations came. Not when the clients turned their backs. Not when my mother whispered, "I warned you not to go after them," and slammed the bedroom door for the last time. He stayed, stiff-backed, sober, silent. "It's not truth that wins in courtrooms, Elise," he told me once, pulling a blanket around my shoulders while I sat curled in his office chair. "It's timing, money, optics, and Whitlock has all three." Roman Whitlock wasn't in the room that day. He didn't have to be. His signature was on every document that buried my father, his lawyers, his influence, his quiet reach across state lines. They choked every route my father could have used to clear his name. He never stood a chance. The collapse was clean, surgical. We lost the firm, the house. My dog went to a shelter. My mother went to New Hampshire. But my father? He stayed, until his heart didn't. I found him in the kitchen 2 years later. Coffee mug in the sink. Legal pads still scattered on the table. He died sitting up. The only sound I made that day was the closing of the front door behind the paramedics. That's when I stopped crying. For good. I changed my name by senior year. Put my head down. Law school on scholarship. Clerkship in a firm 3 floors below Whitlock and Copenau. I thought I'd feel something when I finally got into the same elevator as him. But he didn't even notice me. Not that day. Not the next. Not even when I started speaking in meetings, nodding at his notes, echoing his phrasing. He saw me as competent, efficient, useful. And that was all I needed. The night he proposed was strange. It wasn't romantic. There was no ring, just him, standing by the fireplace in his penthouse, holding a glass of scotch and saying, "I need a wife." I had blinked. For what, exactly? A merger. Image control. Certain investors are more confident with stability. A pause. It won't be permanent. I could have laughed. I almost did. But instead I said, "You want a contract?" He looked me in the eye. "I want a partner who understands discretion." I said yes, not because I wanted him, because he'd just handed me the keys to his house, to his world, to the empire he thought no one could ever touch. Back in the present, I sat alone in the bridal suite, still awake as the grandfather clock struck midnight. The fire had long died out. I traced my finger along the carved edge of the cedarwood bed, thinking of the people Roman had likely stepped over to get here. Thinking of my father's eyes, too tired to be angry at the end. He didn't want revenge, but I did. I didn't believe in ghosts. But that night, I felt something press against my skin like breath. The next morning, I woke before dawn and walked through the Whitlock estate like I already belonged. The house was an archive of control, every hallway pristine, every bookcase arranged by color, not author, every rug symmetrical to the floor tiles beneath. This was a world built not for warmth, but for legacy, and I'd just become its centerpiece. In the East Corridor, I passed a gallery of portraits, Whitlocks through the ages, stern, pale, unmoved. The last was a painting of Roman and his late wife, Alana. She was beautiful, fragile-looking, dark curls. Quiet eyes, I stared longer than I should have. Something about her expression unsettled me. It wasn't warmth, it wasn't pride. It was something I recognized in myself. Resolve. A maid came around the corner, startled to see me. "I'm Mrs. Whitlock," I said gently. "Just walking." She nodded, curtsied slightly, and vanished. In the conservatory, I found Roman. He was reading the paper, wearing a dark wool sweater, sleeves rolled, his hair damp from a shower. When he saw me, he didn't smile, but something in his eyes shifted. "You're up early." I couldn't sleep. He folded the paper in half, precise as always. "You'll get used to this house." "I don't plan to." His brow arched. "That's honest." "I assume you prefer honesty. I prefer clarity." A beat. "Coffee?" Nodded. He poured me a cup without asking how I took it. Black. Bitter. Like his gaze. We sat in silence. Not awkward, not comfortable. Just silence. Then I said, "Do you always eat breakfast alone?" "I do everything alone." I sipped. "That sounds lonely." "It's intentional." I held his stare. "So was this marriage?" "Yes," he said simply. I turned back to the window. Outside, the snow was beginning to melt. Not quickly. Just enough to soften the edges of the frozen world. In that moment, I realized something strange. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't warm. But he wasn't unreachable either. Roman Whitlock wasn't the villain I had rehearsed in my head for a decade. He was a man who'd forgotten how to be human, and worse, no one in his life seemed to mind. That didn't change anything. I wasn't here to rescue him. I was here to dismantle him. One perfect cup of coffee at a time. Some silences are passive. This one wasn't. That evening, I chose the blue silk dress, the one with sleeves just off the shoulder. Modest, but suggestive enough to make a man wonder. I wasn't trying to seduce Roman. Not really. But I wanted to see if he would look. Not as a husband, as a man. When I entered the dining room, his eyes lifted. Just for a second. But it was enough. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow, no tie, his collar open just enough to show the pulse at his throat. The room smelled like aged wine and something darker, cedar and salt and cold air leaking in from a cracked window. "You look different tonight," he said. "It's a dress," I replied, sliding into my seat. "Not the dress." I didn't respond. Let the silence speak for me. Dinner was quiet again. Roasted lamb, root vegetables, a sauce I couldn't name. I noticed he chewed slowly, methodically, as if tasting wasn't the point. Just control. Halfway through, I reached for my water glass and brushed his hand, just a fingertip against his knuckle. He didn't flinch. But he did pause. I saw it. That half-second pause where the air thickened. After the plates were cleared, he stood. Walk with me? His voice was too even. Yes. We walked the outer corridor, its arched windows showing the moonlit garden below. My heels tapped softly on the tile. Roman's steps made no sound. He moved like he belonged to the house, as if the floors bent to him. Why law? He asked suddenly. I was good at it. That's not a reason. That's a skill. I smiled faintly. Maybe I liked watching people lie under oath. He stopped, turned to face me. You enjoy manipulation? Don't you? A flicker in his eyes. Maybe amusement, maybe warning. I enjoy accuracy, he said. Outside the glass, snow fell again, gentle, slow. He stood close enough that I could smell the heat of his skin under the starch of his shirt. Clean. Sharp. He hadn't shaved that morning, and I could see the faint shadow on his jaw. If you think I married you for affection, he said quietly, you're mistaken. I never assumed that. Then what do you assume? I met his gaze, steady. That you needed someone who wouldn't ask questions. And will you? Only the right ones. He stared at me a long time, and I could feel the tension between us tighten. Not sexual, not romantic, but something else. Like a line drawn on the floor, daring one of us to step across it. He didn't. Neither did I. The next day, I passed by the old music room and heard it. Piano, a few broken notes. Then silence. Then another try. I peeked through the half-closed door. Roman sat at the bench, his back to me, pressing keys with slow precision. He wasn't playing for beauty. He was remembering. I watched him a full minute before I realized what I felt. Pity, and I hated that. That evening, I tested him again. I walked into his study without knocking. A bourbon glass in my hand. I didn't sit. I stood by the window, letting the low lamplight catch the curve of my neck. He didn't look up from his papers. Did you need something? I was bored. He flipped a page. You'll get used to that. I don't plan to. This time, his eyes lifted. Do you always repeat yourself? Only when I want to be heard. A pause. You were, he said quietly. I set the glass down on his desk, deliberately close. The scent of lemon oil on the oak wood mingled with the bourbon. He reached for the glass. Our fingers didn't touch, but the heat between them almost did. Careful, I said. It's strong. So are you. Then he drank. And for the first time since our wedding, I felt the power tip, just slightly. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the cedarwood bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind calculating timelines, files I still needed to access, conversations to steer. But something kept intruding. His eyes, not their color, their stillness. The kind of stillness that wasn't emptiness, but grief restrained. The next morning, I lingered longer at breakfast. Roman read the paper. I watched him over my coffee. You don't miss her, do you? I asked suddenly. He didn't ask who I meant. No. Then why keep her portrait? He turned the page. Because I owe her nothing but memory. You loved her? He didn't look at me. That's not your business. But I'm your wife. A slow glance up. Are you? And there it was. My first real wound. Later that afternoon, I returned to the portrait of Alana Whitlock. I stood in front of it, reading every brushstroke like a diary. She looked brave and sad, like she knew this house would never be hers. I went back to my room, unzipped my dress, and stood in front of the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't crying. She never did. But something in her posture, shoulders drawn, lips pressed, told me the war she started might not go as planned. They say the dead can't speak. But in this house, she whispered from every corner, Alana Whitlock. Her name was never said aloud. Not by Roman, not by the staff, but her presence lingered. On the piano bench, in the dustless vases, in the guest wing that no one entered. I had memorized her face from the portrait. But it was her absence that haunted me. And today, I planned to press that ghost into the light. It started with the drawer. I waited until Roman was out on business. He always left just before dawn, as if the sun couldn't rise if he was still at home. I used the excuse of redecorating the library, an idea he approved of with a dismissive wave, and had the key brought to me. Inside the antique desk in the far corner, behind the third drawer, was a locked compartment. I knew about it because I had watched the housekeeper open it once to check for moths. I hadn't forgotten. It clicked open with a soft metallic sigh. Inside, a red leather journal, worn at the edges. No name on the cover. I turned to the first page. The handwriting was delicate, slanted. A woman's voice still breathing through ink. He doesn't smile in his sleep. Not even then. Alana's journal. I didn't read all of it. Not out of guilt. There was none. But because every line I read made my pulse shift in ways I didn't want to admit. She hadn't been naive. Or blind. She had loved him fully, yes, but also watched him with suspicion. She wrote of his long silences, his absences, the strange ache of sharing a life with someone who built entire empires and couldn't say, "I miss you." I thought marriage would melt him. It didn't. It froze me. I stopped reading after that. For the first time, I wondered if I was truly different from her, or just more calculated. That evening, I wore black. Not for mourning, but for contrast. The silk clung to my hips and caught the hallway light like water. I walked into the lounge where Roman was nursing a drink and stood in front of the fireplace. He looked up. Didn't blink. "New dress?" he asked. "New mood," I replied. He sipped his scotch. "And what brings this mood?" "Your late wife." The glass paused at his lips. I stepped closer. I found her journal. His gaze didn't soften, didn't harden. It simply locked. "You went through my things." "No," I said. "I went through hers." He set the glass down. Gently, as if afraid anything louder might break something he didn't want me to see. "You think she'll help you understand me?" he asked. "No," I said softly. "I think she already did." A long silence. He walked past me, stopped at the mantel, touched the edge of a framed photo I hadn't noticed before. "You think I destroyed her?" His voice was quiet, barely above breath. "I think you made her disappear." He turned then, slowly, and for the first time since I married him, I saw it. Not power, not control, but grief. "I loved her," he said, simple as a fact. "She didn't believe that," I said. His jaw tightened. "She wanted a version of me that never existed." "And what do you want?" I asked. He studied me. I felt my skin burn under that look, not from desire, but from being seen. Really seen. "I want silence," he said. "Then why did you marry me?" He didn't answer. Just walked toward me and stopped so close that I could feel the heat from his chest. I don't remember why anymore. The next words I spoke weren't planned. "I'm not her," No, he said. You're much more dangerous. My breath caught. Why? Because she wanted love. You want power. And suddenly, it wasn't a game anymore. I felt it. How close we stood, the magnet between two people who should have stayed on opposite sides. I didn't step back. He didn't move forward. But the air between us pressed and pulsed like a held breath. If I kissed you right now, he said low, would you bite me? Only if you pulled away. But he didn't kiss me. He turned and left the room. And for the first time since I married him, I was the one off balance. Later that night, I went back to the cedarwood bed. The house was silent. Not even the snow touched the windows. I lay awake, trying to remind myself who I was, what I'd come here for. My father's name, the reputation lost, the files I still hadn't found. But her voice from the journal echoed. I thought marriage would melt him. It didn't. It froze me. And I wondered, was I freezing too? Or was I melting without knowing? For days after the journal, we didn't speak of it again. But everything had changed. Our silences were louder. Our glances sharper. Every movement we made around each other carried weight. He was careful not to touch me. I was careful not to want him to. But the air between us had cracked. And no matter how still we tried to be, something kept slipping through. That Thursday, he found me in the West Wing library. I was tracing the spine of an old legal volume when I sensed him behind me. He didn't announce himself. He never did. Roman Whitlock didn't enter rooms. He arrived. Why did you become a lawyer? His voice came low, unexpected. I turned. Because I believed in justice. His mouth twitched. Not a smile. Not quite. Still, do? Not since the day they called my father a fraud. He studied me, long enough that I felt something heat beneath my collar. Your father was Harold Danvers. It wasn't a question. It wasn't supposed to be possible. I felt everything inside me freeze. You knew? I had my suspicions, he said. They were confirmed the day you asked about the Whitlock settlement from 2011. Only someone with skin in the past would care. Then why... I swallowed hard. Why marry me? He stepped closer. Not threatening. Just deliberate. Because I thought I could control it. And now? A pause. Now I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I couldn't breathe. This was the confrontation I had prepared for. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like exposure, like standing under a light I hadn't agreed to. He didn't accuse. He didn't yell. He looked disappointed. Not in me. In himself. Your father wasn't innocent, he said quietly. He wasn't guilty either. He was careless. Trusted the wrong people. I flinched. And you exploited that. Roman's voice stayed level. I didn't ruin him. I let the fire burn without pouring water. You watched him fall. Yes, he said. And I didn't reach. The silence between us now wasn't tense. It was heavy. Too full. I wanted to hurt you, I whispered. I know. Do you? He nodded once. But you didn't come here just to burn me. You came here looking for something else. I stared. Like what? I don't know, he said. But whatever it is, it's killing you. I walked past him, to the window, needing space. The snow was turning to sleet, streaking against the glass in sharp diagonal lines. I thought if I could get inside your life, inside this house, I could find what he never could. Proof. Something to make it right again. And did you? He asked behind me. I didn't turn. No. The sleet kept falling. My reflection in the glass looked older than 25. Everything I thought I needed to feel better, I said. It didn't help. Being your wife didn't fix it. Roman's voice came soft. You're not here to be my wife. I was, I said, until you started looking at me like I wasn't invisible. I turned back. He hadn't moved, but something in him had dropped. The armor, the edges. The CEO had left the room. Only the man remained. Why did you let me in? I asked. I thought I'd break you before you broke me. The honesty stung more than a slap. Did it work? Roman stepped forward. No, he said. You broke something else. Something I forgot I had. We stood inches apart. My throat burned. My hands trembled. I hate you, I whispered. For what you did to him. I know. And I hate myself, I added, voice cracking, for not hating you enough anymore. Roman exhaled like the truth had gutted him. His hand lifted, hesitant, deliberate, and brushed the side of my face. I didn't flinch. I didn't lean in. I just closed my eyes. His thumb caught one tear I didn't realize had fallen. Then he whispered, "Let me carry it now." And just like that, the line between us broke. Later that night, I stood barefoot in the hallway outside his room. I didn't knock. I didn't have to. He opened the door as if he'd been waiting. The bed was wide, cold, untouched. We didn't speak. He reached for me the way someone reaches for something they're not sure they deserve. I let him. Not because I forgave him. Not because I forgot. But because for once, I wasn't pretending. We undressed slowly. Not for performance, for reverence. His hands didn't rush. Mine didn't guide. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't rough. It was real. Bodies colliding not out of lust, but ache. Grief made physical. Truth turned skin. When it was over, I didn't cry. He didn't speak. We lay in silence, and for the first time since I was 11 years old, I felt warm. I didn't mean to fall asleep next to him. I told myself I'd leave once the room was dark. Once his breath had evened out. Once I could feel like I'd won something. But when I opened my eyes, it was morning. Pale light slid through the curtains like a secret. Roman was still asleep beside me. Bare-chested, jaw slack, one arm flung across the empty part of the bed, as if he'd reached for something in his sleep, and missed. I stared at him. I had spent 3 years building the perfect plan, and one night undid it. I slipped out of the sheets quietly. The wood floor was cold beneath my feet. My dress, forgotten, wrinkled, discarded, lay across the cedar trunk at the foot of the bed. I picked it up with careful fingers, as if it might break. I didn't look back until I was already at the door. Roman hadn't moved. But something in me had. Back in my room, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. My skin was flushed in places. My mouth looked fuller. My eyes softer. I didn't look like someone who had won anything. I looked like someone who had surrendered. Downstairs, the estate was alive again. The staff had returned to their rhythm. Breakfast trays, polished, banisters, fires rekindled in the library, everything unchanged, except me. I sat at the long dining table alone. No appetite, no plan. What had I come here for? To find proof, to get justice, to humiliate a man I blamed for everything I'd lost. But last night, I hadn't taken anything from him. If anything, I gave something I didn't mean to. My silence, my softness, myself. Roman entered 10 minutes later, dressed in charcoal gray, fresh-shaven, composed. He paused when he saw me. Neither of us spoke right away. He sat across from me. The same place he always sat, a million miles from touching distance. About last night, he said finally. Don't, I cut in. His eyes darkened. You regret it? No, I said. That's the problem. He said nothing, just nodded once. We ate in silence. But it wasn't like before. It wasn't cold. It was cautious, like walking over thin ice after hearing the first crack. I watched his hands, how they moved, the way he buttered his toast with unnecessary precision, the way his left index finger tapped once against the rim of his coffee mug every time he thought he was unraveling too. He just did it neater. After breakfast, I retreated to the greenhouse. I needed space, needed to breathe something that wasn't made of money or memory. The air smelled like wet earth and jasmine. I curled up on the old wrought iron bench and pulled the blanket over my knees. My father's voice drifted back to me, distant. If you stare too long into your enemy, Elise, you'll start seeing yourself. Had I? Had I seen the parts of Roman I didn't want to see because they mirrored mine? Lonely, grieving, closed off. We had built walls from different stones, but they stood just as high. The glass door creaked. Roman stepped inside. I didn't turn. He didn't sit. He stood behind me for a moment, then said, I wasn't going to apologize. Good. I meant what I said, about not knowing what I'm doing. I wrapped the blanket tighter. And I meant what I said. I didn't plan to feel anything. His voice lowered. But you did. I turned then, slowly. And now I don't know what I'm fighting for anymore. He knelt in front of me. It startled me more than if he'd raised his voice. I don't want to win this war, he said. And if I do, I'll let you, he said. But not without showing you what losing me really means. I looked, down, into eyes I once vowed to ruin, and saw something that felt horribly like love. I don't trust you, I whispered. Then don't fall in love with me. He leaned in, not for a kiss, for my hand. He took it, and held it like it mattered, like I mattered. That night, I didn't return to the cedarwood bed. I went to the gallery room instead. I stood before Alana's portrait and whispered, I'm not trying to replace you. I'm just trying to survive him. But even as I said it, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't surviving Roman anymore. I was choosing him, and I didn't know if that terrified me or saved me. There are kinds of silence that feel like peace. This one burned. The air between Roman and me had shifted again, less brittle, more volatile. A match dropped into a dry forest. We didn't speak much, but when we did, it always lingered. Words hung between us like questions we weren't ready to ask. But the silence was starting to ache. And the way he looked at me now, it wasn't cautious. It was deliberate. It started that night in the study. Rain lashed the windows. Thunder rolled low across the hills. I stood near the fire, flipping through a volume of old Whitlock legal cases, pretending to read. Roman sat, behind his desk, unreadable as always, except for the way he watched me over the rim of his glass. I turned a page too fast. He noticed. You're not here for the books, he said. I didn't deny it. He stood slowly, walked around the desk, and stopped 2 steps from me. The firelight danced along the planes of his face. Cheekbone, jaw, mouth I remembered too clearly. Tell me why you came here, he said. You know why. I want to hear it. I looked up at him, chin raised. To destroy you, a beat, and, "Now?" My voice faltered. "I don't know." His hand came up, just to my shoulder. Not possessive, not forceful, just contact. Human. "You could still do it," he said. "Walk away. Leak what you know. Finish what you started." "Would it hurt you?" He nodded. "Yes." "Then maybe I already did." He stepped closer. "Do you want me to hate you, Elise?" I swallowed. I wanted it to be simple. Me versus you. But every time you do something I don't expect, it breaks the story I built. And last night? That wasn't part of the story at all. He cupped my cheek then. My breath hitched. I should have pulled away. Instead, I leaned in. And the kiss wasn't tender this time. It was hungry. Desperate. Made of everything we hadn't said, hadn't touched, hadn't dared. My back hit the wall behind me, books tumbling from a shelf. His hands were in my hair, mine under his shirt, skin against skin, heat against history. We didn't make it to the bedroom. The couch took us both. Clothes half on, breath ragged, the storm outside pounding like it envied us. When it was over, we stayed tangled. His hand traced circles on my thigh. My fingers rested against his chest. His heartbeat was steady now, but not calm. And I asked the question I shouldn't have asked. Would you have married me if you knew the truth from the start? His reply came after a long pause. Yes, he said. But I wouldn't have let myself feel this much. The next morning, everything felt quieter. Roman was gone before I woke, but at my place on the breakfast table, there was a note. "You're not invisible anymore." I didn't know whether to smile or cry, so I did neither. I simply folded the note and placed it inside my journal, next to the photo of my father. That afternoon, I received a call. The estate's lawyer, Mr. Denning, wanted to go over the terms of a trust fund clause Roman had added after our marriage. I wasn't supposed to be involved, not officially, but Roman had listed me as interested party. I wasn't sure what shocked me more, that he trusted me with it, or that part of me wanted to protect it. In the office, Denning opened a folder and slid a page toward me. There it was, a record of internal transfers, dates, names. One entry caught my eye. 2012. Whitlock Legal's acquisition of Danvers & Co. Assets. My stomach turned. This was the missing proof. My father hadn't sold out. He'd been stripped down, piece by piece. I had come here to find this. And now that it was in my hand, I didn't know what to do with it. Roman walked in then. He saw the page, saw my face. Everything in him stilled. "That's why you came," he said softly. I nodded. He looked at Denning. "Leave us." Once we were alone, I stood, paper shaking in my hand. "You dismantled him." "I let the board do it," he said, "and I didn't stop them. That's the truth." I walked toward him. And now? His voice cracked just once. Now I'd give anything to undo it. I stepped close enough to feel his regret. "It's not justice anymore," I whispered. "It's just pain." His hands reached for mine. "Then don't carry it alone." Tears welled, angrier than sad. "I wasn't supposed to care about you," I said. "I was supposed to win." He pulled me into his arms. "Fierce. Final. Then lose, Elise," he whispered. "Lose with me." I thought once the truth came out, I'd leave. That I'd pack my bags, burn the files, and vanish into the city, back to the woman I used to be. The girl who planned revenge like breathing. The girl who never cried for what she lost. But that girl was gone. Somewhere between the lies and the heat of his hands, I had become someone else, and I didn't know yet if I loved or hated her. The snow melted early that year. It soaked the fields behind the Whitlock estate, turned the stone garden path slick and soft. I walked it barefoot one morning, coffee mug in hand, sweater too big for my frame. His sweater. I found Roman in the west greenhouse, hands in the dirt, replanting something with white petals I couldn't name. He looked up, didn't smile, but I didn't need him to. I sat on the bench and sipped quietly. Finally, I said, "I've decided." He didn't ask what. He waited. "I'm not going to leak the documents." A pause. "Because I don't want to be right anymore. I want peace." He nodded once, not out of relief, but respect. I stood. "That doesn't mean I forgive you." Roman looked at me then, a shadow moving across his face. "I don't want forgiveness," he said. "I want you to choose me anyway." That night I reread my father's last letter, the one he wrote 2 weeks before he died, never mailed. I found it hidden inside the lining of his briefcase, folded in half, torn at the crease. "If you find a man who breaks you the way the world did me, don't run, Elise. Make sure he knows how much it costs to put you back together." I folded the letter again and wept. I didn't see Roman for 2 days after that, not because he was gone, but because we both needed space to breathe inside the wreckage we'd made of each other. On the third night, I came to him. No pretense. No plan. He was in his room, curtains drawn, tie loosened, drink untouched on the nightstand. I stood at the door. He looked up. "If I come in," I said, "I'm not walking back out." He didn't speak, but he held out his hand, and I crossed the threshold. We made love without armor, no anger, no edge, just mouths and skin and breath like confession. He kissed me slow, held my hand like a vow, and when it was over, he tucked a strand of hair behind my ear and said the one thing I never thought he'd say: "I'd marry you again." The next morning, I told him everything. About the USB, about the name I changed, about the nights I stood over his desk and copied passwords I shouldn't have known. He didn't flinch, didn't rage. He just poured us both coffee and said, "You should have told me sooner." I was afraid. Of what? That you'd stop looking at me the way you do now. He reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "Then look at me first." 2 weeks later, we stood together in court. Not to fight, but to file paperwork, a formal confession, a reparation fund, a sealed apology. The Whitlock name signed beside the Danvers name, not in battle, but in alliance. It wasn't a victory, but it was something better. Closure. That night, back in the cedarwood bed where it all began, Roman whispered in the dark, "You were my target." I turned toward him, the weight of his hand on my waist. "And now?" His lips brushed mine. "You're my home." I didn't answer, just held him tighter. Because I finally understood what my father meant. The people who survive us aren't always the ones we love cleanly. They're the ones who see our darkness and stay anyway. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartfelt journeys that stay with you long after the last line. Your support helps keep these stories alive and brings more of them to your screen. Thank you for being here.